uncircumcision has any value at all, that the only thing that matters, he says that, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. So what he's saying in Galatians 5:6 is the thing that matters most is faith, what we get from God, expressing itself through love, what we give to one another. And then, if you connect that, so keep Galatians 5:6 in mind, and then remember what we looked at in Romans chapter 10, verse 17. Paul makes the point that faith comes through hearing the word about Christ. And then here in our passage, Paul makes it clear that real love is impossible without faith. So I'm going to connect all of these things, Galatians 5:6, Romans 10:17, and what Paul says here, to demonstrate where this love that Paul calls for here, this love that sets us free in the context of community where other people disagree with you, where does it come from? Well, if you put all of these things together, you have the strongest biblical argument for why we need to hear the gospel of grace week in and week out. Because according to Paul, faith is vertical, it's upward, it's trusting, it's believing that everything I need and long for I already have because of what Jesus has accomplished for me. That's faith. That's believing, okay? Faith is trusting, believing, depending on the truth that everything I need and long for, Jesus has already secured for me and given to me. He has delivered the goods on my behalf. That's what Paul says faith is. Love, on the other hand, is horizontal. It's outward. Because Jesus has done everything for me, faith, I can now do everything for you without needing you to do anything for me. Love. So he's making the connection. In other words, you can't love one another. I can't love you, you can't love me, we can't love one another without faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Without faith, it's impossible to love one another. You could put it this way. Here's one way to put it. Love is faith worked out by us for our neighbor horizontally. Faith is love worked into us from God vertically. Okay, I'll say that again. This is the connection. Love is faith worked out by us for our neighbor horizontally, like this way. Faith is love worked into us from God vertically. So the implication is that love is absent to the degree that faith is missing. Because what happens when faith is missing? When you stop for a moment believing that everything I need in Christ I already possess, that's faith. When you stop believing that, when you forget that, what happens? Now the burden's back on you. Now the burden's on you to get what you think you need, however you deem right to get it. Let me just conclude with this. In his book, 2,000 Years of Amazing Grace, Paul Zoll, who many of you know, he's here at Liberate every year, he autobiographically recounts what happened to him many years ago when he discovered the indispensability of grace to produce the works of love that are outlined in the Bible. And this is what he writes. My doing of the good deeds that Jesus taught hinged on him loving me. When I felt myself loved in my chains, when I felt myself loved and accepted in my paralysis, that feeling of being loved triggered the very motivation and strength to love that had failed me before. Being treated forgivingly in my faults and fears freed me up. The faults themselves even lost some of their binding strength. The confining fears ceased to restrict me so tightly from loving others. There was an empowering connection between Jesus' love and the fuel to do what he said I should do. I believe this connection between being loved and loving others to be the heart of Christianity. Being loved creates an environment inside a person by which the works of love begin to take place naturally. Loving, he says, is born from being loved. So, just to sum it up, the fuel to do, to love, comes only out of this undomesticated declaration that everything has already been done.